From New York City Police Commissioner under Mayor Rudy Giuliani during 9/11 to prison inmate, the fall of Bernard Kerik, the cop, and then the rise of Bernard Kerik, the prison reformer. Bernard Kerik was the 40th Police Commissioner of New York City. Prior to that, he was Commissioner of the Department of Correction, overseeing New York City prisons. He was nominated by President George W. Bush to be the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security when charges were uncovered and his nomination was being vetted. He ended up serving just over 3 years in prison. He now owns the Kerik Group, which provides security and counterterrorism consulting services. His new book, From Jailer to Jail, My Journey from Correction and Police Commissioner to Inmate, number 844-888-054. Welcome, Commissioner. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
It's our honor to have you on here. Just to start off, such a fall. How did you hold on to your self-esteem and your sanity?
Listen, the reality is when you're going through something like this, I don't think anyone can comprehend the intensity of it unless you've been through it. And it is honestly a fight for your life, because a felony conviction is pretty much a life sentence, especially to someone that's never had a problem with the law, someone in law enforcement, as I was for 35 years. A felony conviction is a life sentence, and you are in a fight for your life. It's almost like somebody's trying to kill you, and it can be devastating to you, to your family, most importantly, to your kids. And it was an extremely difficult time in my life.
Wow. Obviously, you put folks away in your prior life. Did you feel safe when you were there? And also, at times you were in solitary confinement. Murderers, terrorists, the cannibal cop around you.
Where I went initially, I self-surrendered to a minimum security camp down in Cumberland, Maryland, and you couldn't be in that camp. You couldn't be held there if you weren't of a certain classification, and you could not have any violence in your background. So I never had any problems there, that people thought there would be. And there did come a time when I was brought back to New York City to stand as a witness in a state trial. And I was actually put in solitary confinement in New York City, ironically in a unit, which you just said, surrounded by terrorists. The guy on the right of me was in on terror charges, an Afghan. The guy across me, a Somali, on terror charges. The head of the Latin Kings, some guy that killed 5 or 6 people down in Mississippi. And I was stuck in between these guys for 60 days exactly, and it was like, I have to tell you, solitary confinement is a mind-altering experience. You're put in a 12 by 8 metal cell, solid metal, and the only time you come out is 3 times a week for a shower for about 30 minutes, with 1 phone call a month, and no communications or no contact with anyone on the outside. You pretty much lose your mind.
You were convicted now of tax fraud, making false statements. Was this the criminalization of civil offenses?
Well, yeah, and I write about this in the book. There's nothing in my case that couldn't have been handled ethically or civilly. As a matter of fact, this whole thing started based around my nanny. I had a nanny, obviously, that I did not pay, payroll tax on. And, prior to the federal investigation, almost 2 years prior, I had paid those taxes. I paid the fines and penalties. I had Ernst & Young go through the taxes to ensure that it was all done correctly and everything was squared away. But I was still charged anyway with that offense. I had a state court in the Bronx look at some apartment renovations I had done. I paid for. The state said I didn't pay enough, and they charged me for an ethics violation. I paid a $221,000 fine to resolve that. When the federal government came in, they then charged me for the tax violation of the acceptance of this apartment renovation. It was over and above what I paid. So there's nothing that I was charged with that couldn't have been handled ethically or civilly, but the federal government decided to take it criminal. And, so be it.
We'll get into a little bit more detail of some of those issues later on. Do you think there was this was sort of a preemptive attack on Rudy Giuliani's presidential campaign at the time? What did you think was behind this prosecutorial overreach in your mind?
Well, look, first of all, you have to go back in history and look at the time. It was a time when Rudy had already announced that he had started a PAC. He was considering running for president. Then he announced he was running. And every single article, anything that was written about me, he was in it. Anything that was written about him, I was in it. A lot of the Democratic news and networks constantly bashing him, using me, and it was obvious that there was a major political push. And anybody, I don't care who you are, I don't care where you're from, anybody in this country that thinks there aren't selective and political prosecutions, you're either naive or very stupid, because there are. It's unfortunate. It's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to happen, but it does happen. And unfortunately, I think that, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Part of that overreach appeared to be trying to break you financially as well.
Well, there's no trying. I mean, look, when you look at, when you're indicted and you receive that indictment, it says the United States government, the United States of America versus your name. Well, that's no joke. It's the whole United States of America. It's every agency. It's all their money. It's every resource that they have the ability to use. It's them versus a person. And one of the things I talk about in my book is that I am far more, and I was far more fortunate than most people that would go through this process. But there was no way I could withstand this fight. And to give you an example, my legal bills that I was billed was coming in at $100, $150, sometimes $200,000 per month. Oof. And in October of 2009, the month that I pled guilty, I pled guilty in November of 2009. But that month, that 30 days, October 1st to October 30th, 2009, my actual legal bill was $476,000. So if anybody believes, unless you're Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or one of those guys, you can't outfight the government. You just can't. And quite often it's a business deal that you have to make, whether you're going to plead guilty or not.
We're down to about a minute and a half in this segment. How genuinely remorseful are you versus the bitterness of sort of the miscarriage of justice, if you see it that way? Where does that balance?
You know what, the whole bitterness thing, look, I've apologized. People say to me, you don't sound remorseful. I don't sound remorseful. I've apologized 5,000 times. I don't know how many times I'm supposed to do that. Okay, I made mistakes. Believe me when I tell you I have paid for them. As far as being bitter, you know what? I try not to. Sylvester Stallone once told me, use that bitterness, use my anger as fuel to get to my next destination, and that's what I want to do in trying to create the debate for real criminal justice reform in this country.
And we'll talk about that. That's your next mission. It's fascinating to look at your background. You overcame the abandonment of your mother when you were 3 years old. She was murdered several years later. Your father was an alcoholic. You weren't close to him for a long time. You dropped out of high school, and you turned that into the American dream. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I had a pretty rough upbringing. I dropped out of high school when I was in the 11th grade. I went to Eastside High, which is sort of became notorious in the major motion picture Lean on Me. And I was there long before Joe Clark came in and cleaned it up. When I was 13 or 14 years old, I got involved in the martial arts, and I got my black belt by the time I was 16. So I think between the martial arts and the military, I joined the Army when I was 18 and 19 years old. Between the martial arts and the military, that's when my career started to take off. And from that point on, I was sort of on a roll. From one job to another, whether I was, working for the royal family in Saudi Arabia. I did 2 stints there, a total of about 4 years. I was a cop down in North Carolina, came up to New Jersey. I was a correctional officer in a major jail in New Jersey. I turned out to be the commander of the SWAT team there. Then I went back to Saudi Arabia again for a few years. And came back, and I actually took over the jail as a warden at the age of 31. And then I had a lifelong dream to become a New York City cop, so I took off the white shirt and the gold shield and stars and gave up the car and all the perks that came with the job. And I joined the NYPD in 1986 and wound up walking a foot post in Times Square. And worked there for a few years, and then my career took off from there. In 1994, Rudy Giuliani took over as mayor. I had gotten to know him for about 2 years during his campaign. He knew I had some correction background, and he sent me to Rikers Island. They were having major problems, riots, stabbings. They average about 150 stabbings and slashings per month. And I went to Rikers in 1994, and I left when I became police commissioner in 2000 and achieved about a 93% reduction in violence and unparalleled national statistics on efficiencies, security, safety, and accountability, and then became police commissioner.
I have to have very impressive being a business show. I was really interested in that that broken windows brought to corrections metrics called teams. Very impressive. And you saved money, too, by improving the corrections officers' morale by reducing all the dangerous stabbings. Everything sort of fell together.
Right. I mean, the catalyst behind the overtime, behind the sick abuse, was violence. So if you reduce the violence in the prison system, the other stuff will diminish, and it did. And for every percentage point I dropped the violence, we saw increases in efficiencies and decreases in, officer staff sick, decreases in inmates, altercations, staff altercations, and also efficiencies in housing, food, and medical, and all the things you're supposed to do to provide for the inmates. All those were created in a way where we really became a model, an international model, if you will, for how to run a large-scale jail and prison system.
Very impressive. Well, let's jump now. We'll talk about 9/11 later. But let's talk now about going into Iraq and becoming essentially the interim interior minister, and with the mandate to rebuild the security of the police forces.
Well, when I retired as a police commissioner in 2001, I thought my days in public service were over until May of 2003, when I got a call to, go to Iraq to assist in reconstituting the interior. The Ministry of Interior was responsible for the national police, immigration, customs, and border control. So I accepted. I went. I was there for 3.5 months during a really difficult time. It was still very much a war zone. I was actually there when they bombed the Jordanian mission. I was there when they bombed the UN and they killed Sergio Virdamilla. I was there when they bombed the Najaf mosque and killed close to 200 people. And I stayed there until we actually appointed the Iraqi minister, Nouri Badran, and then I came back home. So, and then I thought my public service days were over until President Bush won the election and
The fixing the police. How were you able to be successful? And then at the end, have we made any real progress in Iraq the way things have ended up?
No, I think the key at the time for me was to reconstitute the interior, to get things back up and running. You have to realize that much of the Iraqi interior, much of the Iraqi military and the national security services, they basically imploded. They scattered back into the communities. And the objective for us was to get them back up and running as fast as possible, because the U.S. military was sort of the policing network at the time. It wasn't an easy task. And over time, and it took a lot of time, because a lot of the stuff you were starting from scratch almost, it started to grow, and right up until General Petraeus was involved in the surge and put the surge together, and that was a flipping point where I think we really gained momentum and had control. I think we've lost an enormous amount, just about everything, as a result of pulling everybody out of Iraq and losing our intelligence capability, losing our access, losing our connection to the Iraqis, and not providing the Iraqis with the support and the resources they need to maintain what they had. So I think we've suffered some major damage.
After the appointment for the Department of Homeland Security begins to fall through, you helped build the National Crisis Management Center in Jordan under King Abdullah, and it's pretty amazing to me that what you got done at the same time the feds were closing in, and we're going to talk about what happens next. Coming next, the fall of Bernard Kerik. Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, announcing a new crime show on Mondays at 6 p.m. on 1490 WGCH. All talk and all crime, the nation's biggest murderers. We're the go-to source for the Moxley murder and the Skakel appeals. Financial crimes on Wall Street. Inside the crimes of Putin and the Russian thugocracy, and more. The facts, the forensics, the inside stories, the penetrating questions. Exclusive interviews, whether it's Bobby Kennedy's claims his cousin Michael Skakel is innocent, or the only broadcast interview granted by an insider trader just out of prison for the biggest insider trading scandal in Wall Street history. The Madoff scandal, political scandals, we'll get the interviews others can't get. A new show from the host of Business Talk with Jim Campbell. It's Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, all talk and all crime. Mondays at 6 p.m. right after the Lisa Wexler Show on 1490 WGCH Greenwich and WGCH.com anywhere. We're talking with Bernard Kerik. He has a new book out called From Jailer to Jail, My Journey from Correction and Police Commissioner to Inmate. And we're going to look now at that fall, some of the charges and what went underneath the hood. Let's talk about the tax fraud, what they call depriving the public of honest services. And there's this renovation of an apartment in the Bronx. And at the same time, a Frank D. Tomaso is looking for a city waste authority license, which you really don't have direct linkage to, but the favors that were alleged were that you paid $33,000 for these renovations, and then they actually paid the contractor a lot more, $165,000, to do the actual work. I want to get your thoughts on it, and didn't you assume that it would look bad, that you could tell more work was being done than what you had really paid for?
There's a couple of things, Jim. First of all, okay. I got to give you a lot of credit. You've done a lot of research here. Just to make clear, that during this whole time, Frank D. Tomaso ran a company called Interstate, and Interstate and Frank D. Tomaso supposedly, according to the government, was connected to the mob. And every article, everything that was written about me, everything that was said, organized crime, the mob, over and over and over and over. At the end of the day, Frank DiTomaso was charged with perjury, as was his brother, Peter. They were charged with perjury, and basically because he said he hadn't paid for the apartment. Well, he was tried in a Bronx court. He was acquitted. And when he was tried in that Bronx court, I had to go testify. And one of the things that sickened me the most about this whole case, and I really didn't get into this in a book, and I should have, when I went to testify in that case, I was called into a room with the prosecutor who walked in and told me, listen, you're under orders. When you go into that courtroom, you're not allowed to say the word mob, organized crime, mafia, anything like that. You can't say that. And I looked at this, I said, you're kidding me, right? You guys have smeared these people for 6 years, 7 years. They're organized crime, they're this, they're that. You knew they weren't, and yet now I'm not even allowed to say why this all started. There was no organized crime connection.
There is none.
Frank DiTomaso. There was none. Frank DiTomaso was acquitted. His brother was convicted of a perjury charge or something he said in the grand jury. That itself was overturned. That conviction was overturned by the appellate division. And the actual contractor that did the work on the apartment, he said in court that when they were talking about what he did or didn't do or what the conversations with the DiTomasos were, he actually said he couldn't remember what was reality because the prosecutors had badgered him so much and told him what to say. He didn't know what was real and what wasn't. So there's the case on the apartment renovation. And look, I paid for the apartment renovation. I paid the bill I was asked to pay. Did the contractor put more into it? Yes, he did. It was a lot nicer than I anticipated. Should I have said, hey, listen, you got to knock it off at some point. Don't do this or don't do that. I just didn't think anything of it. It's just, Frank DiTomaso was a friend. This guy worked for him. And I thought, he's doing something, to make Frank look good or whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, there was no quid pro quo, and the Bronx district attorney had to say it in open court, and that's what he told the judge.
So let me ask you this, because this also just blew me away. You ended up paying $221,000 in fines, which is more obviously than the gift, if you will, the $165,000. Your own lawyer, Joe Tacopino, ends up basically telling you to do this, which triggers tax fraud charges, and he basically betrays you.
Yeah, you know what, Jim? It's like an ongoing nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I had an attorney who told me that the investigation was over if I paid this fine. It was an ethics violation fine. I paid the fine, $221,000. It was more than they said the apartment was even worth, and they said it would be over. The Bronx said it. My attorney said it. And within weeks after that, that I took that plea, the federal government came in, and then they charged me again, this time with the tax issue of the apartment. So now I owe $187,000 in restitution for the taxes. Forget the money I lost. Forget the millions in legal bills. It's just this draining, ongoing thing that you just can't get away from. And yes, my attorney, Joe Tacopina, became a target or a subject of an investigation during the course of my federal inquiry. He was called in by the prosecutors and had discussions with them about me and my Bronx case behind my back, unbeknownst to me, and never told my attorneys that he was doing this.
Pretty amazing. Now let me beat you up a little bit on this and get your comments. You talked about in the book an apartment that was, I think, downtown near Battery Park or whatever, and that the prosecution had accused you of using this for personal reasons and that you were depriving first responders. You're very adamant in the book that first responders had nothing to do with it. That wasn't true. But you did not really mention in the book that you did use it for liaisons, etc. Do you sort of tarnish your outrage by not having put that in, or let me give you a chance to answer that?
Oh, I put it in specifically, and the prosecutors never said that it was put aside for first responders. It was the press and the media, and unfortunately,
Okay.
once one entity writes something like that, everybody else, instead of reporters going out and looking at it, or individually looking at it, they just sort of rewrite what's already been written, and it was a false statement. The reality was there were no apartments set aside for first responders in that building, and my chief of staff had gone to the building manager and asked for 3 apartments, and we got them. They were vacant apartments at the time. As for who went to the apartment and who was down there to see me or who came to see me or whatever, that's none of nobody's business, and I wasn't putting it in there anyway. But the reality is, I just wanted to make it clear that I didn't take any apartments from any first responders. That was not the case.
All right, that's fair. Now, let me ask you this. This seemed like tremendous judicial abuse. The judge in the case basically kept forcing you to recuse, to get rid of your lawyers, and essentially have to pay for new sets of lawyers. He sentenced you over the maximum. He tried to get you to hire a lawyer that was a friend of his. I mean, what do you say about that stuff?
You know what? I don't know what to say. I honestly don't know what to say. And I don't know your background, but I do know that I've had dozens of lawyers. I've had judges read the actual transcripts. Now, these are transcripts. Anything relating to the judge in that book is coming from a transcript. And I have yet, including my editors, the legal division, nobody has ever heard of anything like that. I'm not a lawyer. All I know, my judge, from my own personal feeling and opinion, he despised me immensely. He made these absurd comments about his massive ego, and what a massive ego he had, and how he's going to put that on display, and how if my attorneys and the prosecutors wanted to argue, take it home and take it out on your wives. That's what spouses are for. And the only jurors that don't like me are the ones I date. And this whole thing about my lawyers, you're disqualifying. You're sitting, and I'm sitting in front of him. He's talking to me about disqualifying my legal team, and he's actually asking me or encouraging me to talk to his friend and mentor and the guy that trained him and who he considered the best attorney in the world. He didn't do this once. He did it several times. It's just, I'm telling you, this whole thing was like a nightmare, like that I just couldn't get away from. And
really outrageous. And you had over $2 million of legal fees basically broke you. As we finish the last minute of this one, what happens is a break with Rudy Giuliani. How bad did that feel?
Well, listen, we initially created a separation. I didn't want him near me, or he didn't want me near him when all this was going on, just to lessen the press and the badgering that was going on. At some point, once I pled guilty, I just would have hoped he would have looked out for my kids. My 2 daughters, my youngest daughters, who are 12 and 15, are his goddaughters. He stood in the church and basically said, he'd be there if I wasn't in my absence. Believe me, I was gone. He never came around and never called, and that was a bit disturbing.
Let's talk about your mission now in life. You feel that there's a big need for prison reform, that often the sentences, particularly in the nonviolent, don't fit the crime. Talk a little bit about your vision.
Honestly, Jim, it's the overall criminal justice system, not just the prison system.
Okay.
And here's why. Our sentencing guidelines and mandatory minimums are draconian. We have a judge in Utah just sentenced somebody 4 or 5 years ago, 55 years to prison for selling marijuana. There are mandatory minimums that are completely draconian, and they have to be revamped or repealed. and I'm not the only one saying it. It's coming from former attorneys general. Many of them, it's coming from Supreme Court justices, and hopefully the U.S. Sentencing Commission and our legislators pay attention and do something about it. I think we need alternatives to incarceration. We've evolved into a society now where we believe that everything, anything, people should go to prison. Everybody should go to prison. But I don't think anybody realizes that we're putting people in prison for ethical violations, for civil violations, for regulatory violations, commercial fishing. They caught too many fish. We put them in federal prison. A guy sells a whale's tooth on eBay, federal prison. Enhancing your income in a mortgage application, to buy your first home with your new bride, federal prison. And these young kids, especially out of the minority community, first time, nonviolent, low-level drug offenses, 10 years, 15 years. They're putting them in federal prison. And I think this creates the question, well, it's really the answer, but I think it's a question that most Americans couldn't answer, and that is, how is it that we in the United States of America are 5% of the world's population, yet we hold 25% of the world's prisoners? How is it possible that we have more prisoners in this country in prison than Russia and China? And I think lastly, well, there's two last things. One, if people are mentally ill or they have addiction issues, they don't belong in prison. They belong in treatment centers. Like I said, we believe prison's the answer to everything. We just lob them all in there. It's human warehousing. And the last thing is, we are taking thousands upon thousands of people every year out of the workforce by making them convicted felons. We are creating a permanent underclass, a permanent second-class citizen in this country by the millions, because all those people, those commercial fishermen, they can't never go to work again. That guy that enhanced his real estate, his income on a real estate application, he can't get a job. The guy that sold the whale's tooth on eBay, he may have worked at UPS. He lost his job. He's not going back to UPS, and he can't find a job nowhere because he's a convicted felon. And all those young kids that never had a problem with the law before, we now monsterize them. We turn them into real thugs. We teach them all the worst of the worst stuff, and then we send them back into the community, and everybody stands around in a big circle jerk in Washington wanting to know why the recidivism rate's not coming down.
Well said. You also make a good case about the collateral damage, even being a generational cycle where basically a father is taken away from his son, and there's nothing there for that son, especially in low-income communities, and what happens? The same cycle. Well,
and people, that look at today. Look at every news station today. What are we talking about? Violence in the minority neighborhoods. Where the fathers? They're all in prison. They're all in prison. And, some, look, and don't get me wrong, bad guys that do bad things, violence, stuff like that, they belong in prison. You got to keep society safe. But I have to tell you, unbeknownst to me, we are putting way, way too many people in prison, and I didn't know it until I got there.
Other interesting thing is that we spend about $30,000, $28,000, I think you see in the book, per prisoner, but you estimated it might be as much as $500,000 per prisoner when you take away their economic impact and the investigation costs.
Well, Jim, all you have to do is look at that commercial fisherman. The people on his boat, they lost their boat. They lost their job. He lost the boat. His wife, she worked for the company. She lost her job. He lost his job. In fact, they lost their house. Who pays for that? We do, the American taxpayer. At the end of the day, you probably took about $1 million a year loss because this guy caught too many fish. And I know there's people saying, well, he has to be held accountable. Yeah, he does. Fine him. Fine him. Suspend his license. Take his fish. Do something, but don't turn him into a career criminal and a convicted felon where he can't work for the rest of his life. Because once he gets out after 18 months, he's not getting his boat back. He's not getting his license back. And he can never do what he used to do and what he's done for the last 40 years. The only thing he knows how to do, he can't do anymore. And there are a bunch of those guys that we do this to. We're taking hunters who shoot the wrong animal on the wrong day with the wrong permit. We're turning them into convicted felons. It's got to stop.
We're down to the last couple of minutes. I read that Norway runs their whole prison with a reintegration guarantee. Everything is focused on getting the guy back into society, productive, educated, job training. Nobody can be sentenced for more than 22 years. Do you know about Norway? What do you think about sort of changing the whole philosophy of trying to control and punish to get them to reintegrate?
Well, here's the problem. We don't do anything. And this is very much a reality. We do nothing realistically for reintegration. Nothing. We talk all those programs, sit and listen to people testify before Congress, and then look at realities as far as what we really do. We completely contradict the mission statement for our criminal justice system. It has to be revamped. It has to be reformed. And this is coming from somebody, I know the system. I know it better than anyone. I ran two of the largest organizations, law enforcement organizations in this country, and nobody, with my experience, has ever been on the inside. No one.
That's a great way to end it. I want to thank you for your service. Your patriotism really comes through in the book, and now you're dedicating yourself to prison reform. That book, again, is From Jailer to Jailed, My Journey from Correction and Police Commissioner to Inmate. Is published by Threshold, an imprint of Simon & Schuster. You can go to the Kerik Group to learn more about his current business. Our podcasts are available on iTunes. Thanks to Bernard. Thanks to our national audience for listening.